Today I'm going to show you how to make this earth animation in Blender. We will be using nodes to achieve this effect. Hope you enjoy. First, we are going to add in a UV sphere. We're going to shade that smooth, and we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier. We're going to bring that up to, maybe bring that down to 3. Let's come to the shading tab, and let's add a new material for this sphere. We're going to name this an earth material. Let's delete the principled BSDF, and let's add in a diffuse BSDF. Plug the BSDF into the surface. Now we're going to add an image texture, open image, and let's choose the albedo image. We're going to plug the color into the color. Let's add a texture coordinate. Generated into vector, and we're going to change the flat into sphere. Now we can see that it looks just like the earth. Next we're going to add a glossy effect by adding a glossy BSDF, adding a mix shader, and we're going to plug the BSDF into the bottom shader. We're going to change the roughness to 0.2, and actually we want to switch these around, so let's pull that out, bring that through here. And color into color. Now you can see that the whole earth is glossy, but we only want the sea to be glossy, so let's add in an image texture, open, and add the ocean maps. Let's plug the generated into the vector, plug the color into the factor. Now we can see that it looks a bit odd, so let's change the flat in the image texture to sphere. Now we can see that all of the land is glossy, but we want to invert this. So let's Shift A, add a invert node, plug that in there. And here we can see that all of the sea is glossy. However, we want to maintain its blue color. So what we have to do is come back into the nodes. We want to bring this down here, add in a fenzil. We want to add a mix shader, plug that in there, the fenzil to the factor, and now what we want to do is plug that down there, and the diffuse into the shader. Now you can see that the sea is glossy and is blue. Next, we are going to add an image texture, open, and use the bump. We're going to plug the generated into the vector, and change it from flat to sphere. Going to add a bump. We're going to plug the color into the height, and the normal into the diffuse normal. We're going to change the bump to 0.1. Now you can see the land has some texture to it. Let's come to solid view mode. Let's Shift D, duplicate, and press S 1.005. And let's rename these clouds, and also let's rename this earth. Now let's remove that texture from clouds, and let's add new. Let's name this clouds. Let's delete the principled BSDF on the clouds. Let's add in a diffuse. Plug that into the surface. Let's add a image texture. Let's open the clouds. Let's add in a texture coordinate. Plug the generated into the vector. Change from flat to sphere, and the color into the color. Now we can see that we have clouds on our outer sphere. Let's move the output away and add a mix shader. Now let's add a transparent BSDF. Let's plug this into the top shader, and the color of the image into the factor. Now if we come into rendered mode, let's change this to cycles. Let's change this to GPU. Let's add in a light and sun. There we go. Now let's add a bump node. Let's plug the color into the height. Bring that out. And let's plug the normal into the normal of the diffuse. Let's bring these out a bit. Put that there. Let's change the distance to 0.1. Make sure that we're saving as we go. Maybe to 0.04 actually. Now we have some texture on our cloud. Now we want to Shift D and scale by 1.005 again. And let's rename this the atmosphere. And this will obviously be our atmosphere. So let's remove this texture, add new, call this atmosphere. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually Control A to apply the scale so that the normals aren't messed up on all of these spheres. Let's bring the sun up so that we can see it. Now let's get back to the atmosphere. Let's delete the principled BSDF, add a diffuse as usual. Let's also add a layer weight, bring that up here. And let's add a transparent BSDF. In the middle of all this, we'll add a mix shader, bring that there. Let's pull out the output. BSDF to the bottom shader, transparent to the top, and the layer weight into the factor. For demonstration purposes, let's change this to a bright green so we can see what's going on. Actually, we need to change this. And let's put the shader into the surface. If we come to render mode, let's actually turn up the sun a bit. Bring that to 5. And let's change the world to fully black. Okay, now we can see that wherever the camera is pointing, we see less of this atmosphere and the outside shades into green. So what we can do here is change the color to a nice blue, atmospheric blue. There we go. Now let's bring the output out a bit. Let's add in a mix shader. Let's add an emission, bring that down here, plug the emission to the bottom shader. Now let's add a normal, gonna plug this hit note, and bring that out. This will control whereabouts our emission will be facing, so let's add a texture coordinate. This time we're gonna use the normal into the normal tab. And let's plug the normal into the factor. Actually, no, the dot to factor. And now if we bring this down, we can see that it's affecting where our emission is going. This will determine where the lights will shine. Now let's make sure that we have this straight in the middle. There we go. That looks about right. Let's actually change this down a bit. Let's come to the earth again. Let's add in a image texture. Let's open and add in the lights. Let's add the color to the strength and the generator to the vector. Let's also change the flat to sphere. Let's change the emission color to a nice yellow, and let's bring the camera into the earth where we want it. Now let's rotate the sun a bit. That looks great. Let's change this to the timeline so we can see what we're doing. Let's keyframe the rotation of the sun there. Let's come to something like 50, and let's rotate it somewhere about here, keyframe that. Let's bring the end frames to something like 120. And let's move the keyframes. Now we're just going to move the emission normal to where the sun is not facing. We're going to eye and insert keyframe for that. We're going to come to the end here. And now we are going to move this. That's a bit too far. Somewhere like that. Let's keyframe that. You can see here that we have our lights on our Earth. Let's go to our camera tab, and let's actually come to solid mode, and we're going to Shift A and let's add an empty plane axis. Let's bring this out on the Y, scale that down a bit. Let's bring that up on the Z, bring it down on the Y a bit. Now if we come to our rendered mode, let's align this with Europe, for example. Okay, if we come to our camera here, and we come to the camera tab, if we check on depth of field, open this, focus on object, and empty. This will blur everything around the empty. Change your f-stop to how you like it. We're going to add a math node, change it to multiply, and change the value to something like 10. Here I've rendered out my sequence. I'm going to select all of these. I'm in DaVinci here, and I'm going to bring these into the editor. Here we go. Now we have a video that we can work with. We're going to come to the sound. I've downloaded some sound here. See how this sounds. That sounds pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it off where it needs to be cut off. So let's bring it to the end here. Let's split this and delete the end. Now we have our animation with some music. I'm actually going to fade my music and my video in and out. So let's come to audio transitions, -3. Let's scale this down a bit. Same with video transitions. Let's select the bar, and we're going to right click and add to both points. Let's scale these down a bit, they're a bit too far. Going to render my sequence now. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you in the next one. Cheerio.